Hi, I'm Ted Morrissey, and I'm making a video for the Lindenwood University MFA in Writing program, and specifically my course in the classic horror and sci-fi by women writers um, course. So um, I think this is our last week together. I want to sort of end on what may be an appropriate note. Earlier in the session, on the discussion board or the announcement board or some board, I think there was a little bit of a discussion among some of us about whether we were going to continue to write or talking about how we might not write one day, and that kind of thing. And so it brings up some interesting issues. I mean, we're all writers. You're involved in an MFA program in writing. So I think the assumption is that, well, you're going to go on, you're going to write, and it's going to be a very regular part of your life, writing and publishing and so forth. But it isn't necessarily the case. I know, and I've said in other videos that a lot of folks who graduate from MFA programs actually don't end up writing much of anything, for various reasons. In some cases, without the constant sort of deadline and pressure to produce, they just don't manage to do it. Maybe they just decide it's not really something they want to pursue in their life or whatever. So it does bring up some interesting issues, and I've been thinking about it recently because, for one thing, I got the new copy of the Sewanee Review, Winter 2022, and as I was perusing it, one of the pieces that caught my eye is a craft essay by Sigrid Nunez titled "Life and Story," and it's basically about why writers write. And so I thought that we might use that as kind of a basis for a video here. I'll just read a little bit from it. It's interesting, though, because quite honestly, I don't think I had heard of Sigrid Nunez. I should have, could have, because in the contributors' notes in the Sewanee Review, which is a venerable and highly respected journal, I'd like to be in there myself, but haven't been. But it says regarding Sigrid Nunez, the author of 8 novels, including most recently What Are You Going Through and The Friend, winner of the 2018 National Book Award. So that's definitely embarrassing that I don't place the name. She is also the author of Semper Susan, a memoir of Susan Sontag. Nunez is a Guggenheim Fellow and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Her work has been translated into 30 languages. She lives in New York City. So obviously a highly accomplished author. But it's interesting because I got this copy of the journal. I read the essay that I'm about to share a little bit of it with you. And then just a few days later, this arrived. And this is the literary journal, I guess you say it, Manuscripts. And this was John Gardner, the novelist and story writer and all kinds of things. He edited this literary journal. And long story why I ended up with the spring 1981 version. But I do like to collect older literary journals. And so, anyway, I collected this one and it arrived. And Gardner prided himself on finding, promoting, discovering new writers, unpublished writers, or at least underpublished writers. And like I said, I had just read Sigrid Nunez's pieces in the Sewanee Review, and then this arrived like 3 or 4 days later. And one of the brand new writers that John Gardner brought out in spring 1981 was a young woman named Sigrid Nunez. And specifically her novel, The Bird That Ate the Stars, and it was published in 2 installments in Manuscripts. So here we have her first, probably significant publication, 1981, and now she is a venerable National Book Award winner, work translated into 30 languages here in 2022. It's kind of the career that I think a lot of people would like to have to reflect on. And yet, she talks about why do we write. Um, so let me just read a little bit from her essay, and and then talk a little bit as I do. I don't want to make this super long, but she this is actually the final section, or nearly the final section of her essay. She says, and now a few questions writers often ask themselves: why am I doing this? What makes writing necessary when I could be doing something else with my time? How do I justify spending all these hours inventing stories about people who never existed when I might be doing something not only more remunerative, but more useful to the world, perhaps something of benefit to people who do exist, perhaps something to alleviate some of the suffering that so endlessly troubles humanity? It's not as if I didn't know that were I not to produce a novel, it would not be missed. With tens of thousands of novels being published each year in the United States alone, who will say that what the world needs now is another novel? Also impossible to ignore what Calvin Trillin said: most books have, quote, a shelf life somewhere between butter and yogurt. Why write then? Why keep writing? And again, this is something that's, I've been on my mind, and I'm going to read a bit more of it here in just a second. But, I write practically every day and have for, I don't know, 35, 40 years. And actually, going back to when I was a kid, I started writing even before I was a teenager. I thought of myself as a writer. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a published writer. So I've been pretty much writing my whole life, and I can't imagine not writing. But at the same time, it hasn't really led to fame and fortune, certainly. I've reached a point, I haven't kept exact count, but I think I'm in the neighborhood of 100 publications or so. I think my novel excerpts and short stories and poems and critical essays and reviews and a smidge of translations have appeared in about 100 publications, journals and anthologies, and online, publications and the sort. I've published a few novels, most of them self-published, although I've had a couple of publishers otherwise. Uh, Three scholarly monographs, one of which I've published, myself, and so on. So, I've got quite a few credits in the world. I've won a handful of awards. Nothing major, no national book awards, that kind of thing. I've gotten some nice reviews, but that's up against literally thousands of rejections. I have no idea how many. They just come regularly. I had a story that I've been wrote, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I've been kind of circulating, and I got entered in a contest, like a horror story contest, and I got a notification a while ago that it had made the long list. But they weren't going to announce that. They were going to, once they got it down to the short list, then they would make an announcement. So a few weeks went by, and I got an email yesterday or the day before. Didn't make the short list. But again, rejections just roll in regularly. So yeah, I've gotten some pats on the back and some encouragement, but those are pretty few and far between compared to just the almost daily rejections that come from somewhere, somehow or another. But yet, I continue to write. And so I think it's an important and an interesting question. Why do writers do it? If for most, they don't end up winning the National Book Award and have their work translated into 30 languages, they persist nevertheless. All right. So a little bit more of Nunez's essay. She kind of goes through and talks about what different writers have said on the subject of why keep writing. Flannery O'Connor's, excuse me, because I'm good at it aside, the answer seems always to have been fraught with doubts. And in these times of extraordinary stress, as the world lurches from crisis to crisis, such doubts seemed to me stronger than they have ever been. In a recent interview, the novelist Sally Rooney said, when you inhabit a time of enormous historic crises and you're concerned about it, How do you justify to yourself that the thing to which you've chosen to dedicate your life is making up fake people who have fake love affairs with each other? Like most answers to the question I've heard, hers isn't very satisfying. She says, I want to live in a culture where people are making art, even as everything else falls apart. It gives my life meaning. Yes, but how does it give it meaning, and what meaning? Nunez asks rhetorically. If every poet sat down to write a poem about climate change tomorrow, I once heard someone say, it would not save one tree. No wonder every writer I know is experiencing high anxiety. I don't know that I am necessarily. But as a friend of mine who is a poet rightly says, it is not the poet's job to save trees. It doesn't matter what's happening in the world, she says. We writers have our work, just as others have their work, and we must do it. And let us not forget, people write because they need to write, because there is something that obsesses them that will not go away until they write about it. To ignore that need is to court who knows what psychological danger. That I definitely can agree with. I definitely feel compelled to write. When I get into a place where I can't write or it's not convenient or something to write for a while, I really do. Then I do start to get some anxiety and get a little bit itchy. Like for example, I was in Albuquerque for nearly a week last week for that conference, and I don't generally write when I'm on the road. I like my own environment, my own space. So by the time I got back, it had been several days since I had actually written. And I was feeling kind of antsy and anxious to get back to it. So that I can definitely relate to. Back to the essay. All that said, I think anyone who is writing would do well to take to heart what another poet, Czeslaw Mislos, has said. Before you print a poem, you should reflect on whether this verse could be of use to at least one person in the struggle with himself and the world. I agree also with these words of the late Oliver Sacks from one of the latest pieces that he wrote. Quote, I revere good writing and art and music, but it seems to me that only science, aided by human decency, common sense, far-sightedness, and concern for the unfortunate and the poor, offers the world any hope in its present morass. In the same piece, Sachs offers his expert neurologist view that what we are seeing in our age of digital addiction, quote, resembles a neurological catastrophe on a gigantic scale. I'm reminded of something Philip Roth said in an interview many years ago. The literary era has come to an end. The evidence is the culture, the evidence is the society, the evidence is the screen, the progression from the movie screen to the television screen to the computer. And then Nunez adds, to which, of course, we can now add other increasingly smaller and more mobile screens. Literature, said Roth, takes a habit of mind that has disappeared. It requires silence, some form of isolation, and sustained concentration in the presence of an enigmatic thing. And this is disturbing, but I think it's largely true. And I no doubt have talked about it elsewhere and in other contexts. But we're have become a culture, a society of non-readers. As I mentioned, I was out of town for a week, which meant spending a significant amount of time at airports and in airplanes. And it used to be a place where you would see a lot of people reading. Before the pandemic, we used to take the Amtrak a lot, easy 3-hour Amtrak ride to Chicago from here. And so we'd do a day trip to Chicago up in the morning, back in the evening, or maybe stay overnight. So we'd be on the Amtrak a lot, another place where people generally would be reading. Not so much anymore. You have just very, very few people reading, but instead they're on their screens. They've brought their laptops, their tablets, they're on their phones. While at the airport, while in the airplane, watching movies, doing whatever it is they're doing. Maybe they could be reading. I guess they could be reading on their tablet or on their phone, but spying on them. I don't see a lot of text going on. It's mainly, movies and things. So we're again, a society increasingly of non-readers, but yet there are those among us who, including myself, who feel compelled to keep producing text. I've just completed for the last couple of weeks a draft of a new novel that I've been working on for like 4 years. And I've got a long way to go yet to feel like it's actually done. Several pieces of it have been published here and there. I've got a few more pieces coming out this year, here and there. But as Nunez remarks earlier that I just read, the world doesn't need another novel. My novels that I have out there in the world have not been widely read. That's an understatement to be sure. And I have no thought that this new novel will be treated any differently by the world. I'll spend time and energy and money getting it reviewed, probably entering it in some contests. Maybe I'll do okay. Uh, will more than a handful of people read it if I'm lucky? I doubt it. To be honest with you, there's nothing in my history as a writer that indicates that more than a few people at most will ever read the book. But yet I'm compelled to write it. I'm compelled to make it as good as it can be, and I find that process satisfying. And there's no thought that I won't write it and that I won't write. I've got another book already in progress. And so as soon as this one is wrapped up, I'll work on that one in more earnest, more focus. I have lots of other writing projects I have in mind. So as long as I can keep doing it, I'll keep writing and keep producing work, whether the world wants it or not. But that's where just about all of us writers find ourselves, particularly here in the 21st century. So it's an interesting thought. Why write? What do we get out of it? Especially if we're not getting read by a lot of people. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts on that are. But I will stop there and let you ponder that. And like I said, I think this is probably my last video of the session. I've enjoyed it very much. You always teach me quite a bit. I can only hope that I've taught you just as much in this course. I look forward to seeing you down the road, maybe in another class somewhere along the way. Otherwise, good luck. I've enjoyed our time together.